Have you ever thought about the possibility of going to Mars? At the International Astronautical Congress in 2017, Elon Musk said, "You want to wake up in the morning and think the future is going to be great." And that's what being a spacefaring civilization is all about. It's about believing in the future and thinking the future will be better than the past. And I can't think of anything more exciting than going out there and being among the stars. So while I have no experience in the field of space, I've admired many things space related, whether that be TV, movies, or books. So for TV specifically, I've watched Cosmos. For movies, I've watched Interstellar, The Martian, and read books by Neil deGrasse Tyson, such as Astrophysics for People in a Hurry and other books. So you may be asking, how is this relevant to me? Well, if private companies are able to obtain what they want, there is the possibility of or a goal of being on Mars and having a permanent colony on Mars by 2050. So that would rely on, as it's the same jobs that would rely on Earth, while also being able to terraform and build on Mars and survive the weather there. So we are going into a new age of space exploration and discovery that's led by private companies, and which will lead to potential colonies on Mars and jobs for people. So space exploration and discovery will be driven by privatized companies, which will accelerate the potential discoveries and exploration able to be conducted at a faster pace than what is currently done by NASA. So private companies are going to be essential, and that's due to NASA's declining federal budget, and there's a better opportunity for private companies to come into the field and share that financial burden with NASA to help take on the challenge. So let's get started. NASA cannot bear the financial burden, which has shrunk over time. This is evidenced by during the space race, it was at the highest percentage in 1966 with 4.1% or 4.41%, which was $5.9 billion or $45.9 billion today, adjusted for inflation. The last recorded year, which was 2020, NASA's federal budget represented 0.48% of the federal budget, or $22.6 billion. So while the space race era was bound to see a decrease in the federal budget spending, NASA's budget is increasingly or has decreasingly and declined from 1992 to 2020, which you can see by the federal budget being 1.01% in 1992 and 0.48% in 2020 once again. So consequently, NASA's steady budget decline has stunted the possibility to thrive and expand beyond their current missions. So that's where private companies can play a pivotal role. So the 1960s also obviously represented the height of the space race, where the USSR was able to have their man go to the moon, and the US reached its goal of getting a person on the moon, and while the USSR was in space. So since then, since during the Cold War, there has been a lack of competition by NASA, and so these private companies will revive that competition. So in contrast to the problems that arise in government budget-led space exploration, private companies can risk whatever amount of budget that they want. So private companies revive a sense of competition and have worked with NASA to create better innovation and better competition and technology. So the private companies are led by some such as Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and SpaceX, but they represent just a fraction of the private companies that are creating spacecraft, space gear, and other forms of space, such as rovers and needed for space, such as rovers and stuff like that. So there's a possibility, there's also the possibility of not being taxed in the same way or not being taxed at all, because private companies are taxed differently than government entities like NASA. So government entities come directly from us, the working class citizens, whereas the private companies, it's taken out of their own unless they're tax exempt, then it would eventually kick back to us essentially. So additionally, we will look towards the future benefits of private companies playing major roles in space travel. So there will be a heavy reliance on private companies responsible for space travel and taking over just menial missions or small missions, whereas NASA will focus on their imminent missions and what they want to do. So other companies will be able to take on the challenges that NASA leaves for us that are not as imminent for them. So one of the main companies, SpaceX, has a proposed mission to Mars in 2030. Um, and Astrobotic, which was a lunar payload service selected by NASA, has a planned mission to the moon in 2024 or 2025, which means as a lunar payload service, they're transporting goods for NASA or for whoever wants them, either to the International Space Station or to the moon, whether it be for exploration or trying to discover or extract new things, it'd be for something like that. But there are potential pitfalls that private companies can run into. Specifically, there are three main things, which are finances, lack of technological innovation, and just the lofty goals in general. So the lofty goals are basically, they're planning 20 to 30 years out, so it could be difficult, or 10 years for potential landing on Mars or less than that. So with that comes the technological innovation. Technological innovation doesn't always go where we expect it to. There's been thoughts of things like flying cars from way back when and other things such as that we still have yet to get to. And then there's just the finances in general as the third thing. The finances are just, if there's no service to be offered really, then how are these companies going to be able to survive? And, because they're just going to be hemorrhaging money in the meantime. But that represents NASA. NASA has their own manned mission for Mars proposed in the late 2030s to early 2040s, which just shows the difference in the private companies and how much accelerated pace they can offer if SpaceX is able to have their proposed mission for 2030 be landed by then or before NASA even. So in conclusion, I've summarized some of the major points why private companies will play a pivotal role, and those are: NASA can't take on the financial brunt anymore. Um, Private companies will accelerate the pace of potential discoveries and exploration able to be conducted, and they will provide better innovation, and there will be a heavy reliance on private companies for space travel, plus taking over menial missions. So think about the potential jobs that would be necessary on Mars. It correlates well with what we have on Earth because it's a similar planet with a different gravitational pull and stuff. But the years are a little bit longer, or almost twice as long. But and the environment's a lot colder. But so we'd have to figure out a few things to get there. But I'll leave you with one quote from the Neil Armstrong and moon landing, which was "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," by Neil Armstrong. He stated that July 20th, 1969. So what Mars represents would be a big leap for humankind, and it begs the question, what would the potential Mars landing quote be? So what I'll leave you with at the end is, we are in the early stages of reviving space exploration and discovery for a new space era. Thank you very much. Have a good day.